What is the creepiest, most inexplicable thing that has ever happened to you? I used to volunteer reading recording books for people who are blind or dyslexic. It was in a studio that was set up in a seminary school. It had a campus, library, a small cemetery, etc. It would just be me in a little recording booth reading through boring textbooks, mostly grammar and Spanish, glossaries, indexes, etc. One day I was going through some conjugation exercises and I knew I was getting really bored and sleepy and was starting to mumble. So I stopped the session, stepped out to get a drink, and then put my headphones back on to rewind to the last thing I said clearly, and start up again. The last thing I hear myself say, in Spanish, clearly, in a quiet serious voice, but in my voice, was "There are men. Those men are standing behind me," or something that loosely translated to that. I furiously looked through my book and found nothing even remotely close to that which I might have been reading. I broke into a sweat, left, and never returned. The silence. My girlfriend from college moved back to Denmark after this last semester for good, and I am back in California for the summer. We decided that Skyping would be the best way to keep in contact as we are unable to call each other now. Anyhow, about a week and a half ago we were Skyping having a good old chat about flights and such when I suddenly felt something wet on the top of my foot. I was sitting at my desk with my feet under it, so I had no idea how my foot could get wet. So I looked down. My girlfriend watched as I had what must have appeared to be a minor breakdown when I realized that my foot was covered in blood. I ran downstairs to show my dad and told my girlfriend it'd be right back. Me and my dad came back up and looked around for anything that could have happened to have dripped blood on my foot. In futility, of course. I went to the bathroom and washed it off and had no cut or anything that would hint at it being my blood. So I get back. I am kind of creeped out, but I decide to simply ignore what just happened when my girlfriend asked me what may remain to this day as the single creepiest question I've ever heard. "Who was that guy that walked out of your room when you went to get your dad?" My face when my dad and I were the only ones home that night. To this day I brush the incident off as just some freak occurrence of random blood, but I can't shake the thought of that question because she said she watched him close my door as he left, a door that I left open on my way down. TLDR, my desk had its period on my foot. New practical joke: whenever someone leaves the room while on Skype, ask who the person is who left the room after them. Profit. I worked at a pet store and we adopted an umbrella cockatoo from the family of an old lady who died. The bird said a few random phrases while there were people around, but if the store was empty and the employees went in the back, she would start screaming the most terrible things. The more notable phrases were, "Mama, Papa, and oh, little boy, little boy." Then the bird would make whispering noises. No, help, child's laughter, and a shrill blood-curdling scream. I don't want to know what was going on in the house for the bird to have learned all of that. I was living in student housing, and the way the mailboxes were set up, there was one for each suite group of 6 bedrooms tucked in behind the main office. I went to collect our mail one day near the start of the month and found a slip of paper with my name on and the number 23 printed on, not written. I assumed someone had put it in there to freak me out and just left it on my desk. Whatever. A few days later, there was a black leather glove in there, also with my name on. Just one black leather glove that I didn't think was weird till I looked closely at it. I had lost this glove the winter before. A few days after that, a hair ribbon of the sort I'd had a phase of wearing, narrow purple hair ribbon. By this time I'd asked all my friends WTF they were doing. They all denied all knowledge. A few days after the glove there was a lipstick, used, in a shade and brand I'd worn before. I had a few of those lipsticks but kept losing them and they'd been discontinued. The problem was, I was at university in a different country from where I grew up, and I'd stopped wearing that lipstick before moving. I waited for the 23rd fully expecting some stalker-tastic event of horror and terror, but nothing happened, and nothing happened after that. I still don't know what was going on. I am tired of stalking this girl. Better return these things I don't need. This is a story my mom told me. When I was still a baby, I caused my parents a lot of sleepless nights because I would cry all the time and there was just no way to calm me down. My grandma, she is Chinese, heard of it and came to visit us. One night when I started crying again, my grandma went to the kitchen and took one of those big Chinese clovers and proceeded to make stabbing motions in every corner of the room, screaming at the evil spirits to leave me alone. Right after that I stopped crying. My parents were so creeped out by this. You probably saw this woman stabbing the air around you and decided it would be a good idea to shut up because that woman clearly did not frick around. One night when I was home alone, I heard some ruckus outside of my house while I was sleeping. I figured it was just my dogs. I have 2 large Doberman, so I brought them inside so as to not let them bother the neighbors. When I was trying to sleep, however, there was more noise, but this time inside the house. Again, I brushed it off as the dogs playing. I was woken up by a third noise, which sounded like a cabinet closing hard, and I looked around to find my things strewn all over the floor, and my room was just a complete mess. My attic, outside of my bedroom door, was slightly open, and my dogs were laying shaking in the corner of the kitchen. My doors and windows were all locked and secure. I really wish I was making this up. Check the area for scuff marks. Someone might be living in your attic. I was about 5 years old, but I remember it clearly. I came from a huge French-Canadian family. My dad had 7 brothers, and we all lived on the same block. My favorite uncle by far was my Uncle Bernard. He drove a moped, grew weed in his backyard, and listened to 70s rock non-stop. He would always pick me up and take me out for ice cream and didn't ignore me and shoo me away like the other adults did. We would fish together and he was one of my best friends. I woke up one night to the feeling of someone sitting on the edge of my bed. I looked up and my uncle was there. He told me my dad was going to need me to be extra good and I would have to help my mom take care of my brother and sister for a little. He ruffled my hair and said, "Who is my girl in the monkey suit?" When I would get angry, I would climb a tree and refuse to get down, so my dad would have to get a ladder to get me. My uncle always called me his little monkey. The next morning at breakfast I asked where my uncle had gone. My parents were confused, so I told them the story. As I was finishing, my Uncle Robert ran into the driveway sobbing and my parents ran outside. My Uncle Bernard had died in his sleep that night. I stood in the window, confused as to why everyone was crying. My mother was so shaken no one was to speak of the fact my uncle was dead in my presence. My grandmother, a crabby old Irish woman, pulled me aside at the funeral and told me I was very lucky to have seen a spirit and that the world was full of them if you knew where to look. I was scared shitless. Everyone in my family treated me differently afterwards. If ghosts exist, what else does? My parents always told me to not be afraid of ghosts, vampires etc. because they didn't exist. I judge reality based on my experiences and not the words of others after that. My brother had antisocial personality disorder. He ended up on trial for a double murder and getting a psych evaluation as well. I was one day contacted by his evaluator and informed that when I was a young child, 5, my older brother, 8, would come in and watch me sleep for about 2 hours every night, many times bringing a rope, pillow, or knife with a desire of killing me. Apparently, he woke up one night, having decided he would go through with it that night, and went to get a knife from the kitchen when he found that his door was locked. For 10 years from that day on, my folks would not sleep without locking his door. At the age of 18, he was given the boot. It was 11 days later that he committed the double murder. I always wondered why we never went on any vacations and always stayed home for Christmas and Thanksgiving. My parents kept all this away from me, but it turns out that when my brother was 7, they found him in the neighbor's backyard trying to burn the corpses of the newborn litter of the next door neighbor's cat. He had beheaded 3 of them and disemboweled another. I had no clue until I turned 18 and was going off to college. Turns out my folks kept a close eye on me, but never had any reason to believe that I was as freaked up as my brother. I remember one time I was driving home from band practice when I was about 17 years old. It was around 12:30 AM and I was really tired. I usually attribute this story to my exhaustion, but I have a hard time believing that. I'm driving down a pretty desolate main road, and as I am driving, I notice an old woman walking down the right side of the road. She is wearing what looks like a brown ragged dress and is using a cane. I thought it was the most bizarre thing to see at 12:30 AM, but I just ignored it and kept driving. The weird thing is, about 3 miles later, as I am driving, I see the exact same woman. I get chills just thinking about it. I see her, clearly, so I slow down a bit to make sure she is real and I am not going crazy. Sure enough, as I get closer, it's the same woman in the same dress with the same cane. Then, suddenly, as I pass, she turns to my car and reaches her left hand out towards my car. I don't think I have ever driven so fast home in my entire life. TLDR. Saw an old woman walking at midnight. 3 miles later, see the same woman again. Probably just a glitch in the matrix. There was a period of time in 2010 where I woke up every morning at 2:15 am. On the dot. When I woke up, I was sitting straight up in bed. The first time it happened, my dog was sitting at the foot of the bed, staring at me, probably confused as to why I was sitting up. The second time it happened, she was at the foot of the bed, whining, crying while staring at me. The third time it happened, she was at the foot of the bed, growling at me. Thankfully, those are the only times that I remember it happening. I think my dog was scared of me for a few weeks after that. She wouldn't sleep in the bed with me and she would sporadically growl at me when she had never done it before. I don't know what the heck was going on with me, but I hope it never happens again. TLDR. My dog thinks I was a demon. Visiting home on break from college, and my stepbrothers had the bedroom, so I was sleeping on the couch, my cat with me as he always does. In the middle of the night my cat jumps off my chest, which causes me to wake up. I then watched him do a slow crawl around the entire perimeter of our house, focusing mainly on the kitchen, heading upstairs and then back onto the couch with me, where he proceeded to stare into the kitchen and growl a slow and quiet growl. I found it odd and fell back asleep. The next morning my mother told me about the dream she had the night before, where she was sitting at our kitchen table with her mother, who is dead, telling the former resident, an old man who committed suicide in the kitchen after his wife died, that the house was ours now and it was time for him to leave us alone in it. All spooky shenanigans ceased from that day forth. Normally, I would brush off either of the two incidences, but their happening at the same time has always creeped me out to no end. TLDR. My cat smelled a ghost that my mother was presently telling to GTFO of our house while she was asleep. One night when I was 16 years old, it was storming really bad. The rain was falling really hard and the lightning had power lines down and there was no power anywhere. Me and my parents opened the door and there is a man riding a horse very slowly in this horrible storm. He looks at us, stops, takes his shirt off and licks his fingers, then rode off in full gallop. To this day I have no idea why a man was riding a horse in the middle of the city. Licks his fingers. WTFF. I rationalize and explain what happened now, but only until years later did I find out what it could be. When I was 15 I woke up one night in bed and sat my head up. At the foot of my bed was a man with really pale white skin just staring at me. It couldn't have been real, but I remember being paralyzed by fear, not able to move. I sat there for about 10 seconds. He then pointed at me and started laughing loudly, like that deep, from the chest evil laugh you always hear. Suddenly a crowd of what I guess could be considered white apparitions came rushing through the room. I need to set this up a bit to understand. I lived in a thrown together house and my room was in a hallway basically. So they ran through my room and disappeared on one side, then would come rushing through the other side. The loud roar of hundreds of footsteps running is what I remember the most. This went on for maybe 30 seconds and then just slowly faded away. I now understand that it could have been sleep paralysis, but for the longest time I was really freaked out. It is now my personal opinion that ghost stories are clearly a form of sleep paralysis. Since not too many people know about it, they assume what they saw was real. The mind is a very powerful thing. Sleep paralysis is no joke. I've only had minor occurrences, but my husband has had really scary ones. I stayed over at my friend's house one night, drinking and playing his PlayStation in the lounge room. We heard a large thud sound and metal hitting the ground in the kitchen. Go out and find a knife that had been sitting in the sink, on the ground, spinning around. Shortly after, the back door starts shaking and sounds like someone is starting to knock on it. Faster and faster. We get up the nerve to go check, and as it is still banging and knocking and shaking, we open it, and there is nothing there. It's not even windy. We freaked out, went back to the lounge room and tried to keep drinking. Couldn't and decided to go to bed. My friend put me in the spare bedroom they had, and I went to sleep after trying for about 2 hours. My friend later told me that he never ever went into that room because it always felt like someone was watching him in there, and to be honest, it really did. It was really unsettling. Freaky butt house. LOL, what a good friend, giving you the haunted room to sleep in. One night, soon after moving into a new apartment, I heard tapping on the sliding glass door in my bedroom. It was after midnight, but I felt safe, so I got up and opened the curtain, but not the door. Some guy was standing there smiling and called me by name. Then he told me how happy he was that I was there and wanted me to come out for a drink by the pool. I told him I didn't know him, and he insisted he worked at the same company, knew a few of my co-workers and worked in the warehouse on graveyard shift. He got all these details right, but I'd never seen him and graveyard shift was pretty small. Then he asked about my sister. I swear I had never seen him before. I described him at work and nobody had ever heard of him. Never saw him again. Another creepy moment. One night I woke up different apartment. For some reason. I don't know why, but I decided to look out the window. There was a guy walking down the middle of the street with a lantern, swinging it back and forth slowly. Creepy. LOL. I had a stormproof Dade's lantern I rebuilt, put new burner in it, and there was a raging windstorm, 45 miles per hour winds. I wanted to see how windproof it was. Very, it turns out. So was walking along the edge of Lake Ontario with it to test it out. Apparently this really freaked out some of my neighbors out because some creepy guy was walking out there in a dark rainstorm with a blood red lantern. I used to stay in an old townhouse in Reading, England. I was working for Microsoft at the time as an intern and shared a house with 3 others. That weekend I stayed home and all 3 went home to see family. I thought cool place to myself, fire up some Oblivion and zone out all weekend. So I am chilling at around 2 AM playing Oblivion and I all of a sudden hear my room door shaking. I walk out in the hallway and look at my door and the handle is twisting back and forth and the door is shaking. The hair on the back of my neck is on end and I open the door thinking it might be the window open or something, but nothing. I slept with the light on that night. If my door handle was shaking and the door was shaking like somebody was trying to open it from the other side, last thing I'd do would be open that sucker up. I was woken up one night by the sound of my roommate moaning the word remember over and over again while staring upwards at the ceiling. He then rolled over and started either speaking in tongues or Korean. I couldn't tell. He's Korean. I definitely couldn't sleep for a little while afterwards. Once I was home alone during the day, and I decided to have a bath. I went in, locked the door, then started running the bath. After spending a while in the bath, I put my head underwater, as you do sometimes in the bath, just for fun. When I sat up, the door was open. Needless to say, I got out of the bath pretty quickly and jumped into bed. Oh crap, someone's in my house, better go to sleep. I live in halls in a university in the UK, with a reputation for drinking. We currently sit in the top 5 of most alcohol consumed per head. Our campus is built round a large lake, and at the start of our degree everyone has to attend a safety talk. The key point of this talk was do not swim in the lake. It's quite shallow but the bottom is covered in around a foot of thick mud and plants. The speaker stressed the point that, at least once a year, a fresher gets drunk, swims in the lake, and drowns. Although, this has yet to happen this year. Anyway, one night, I wake up in the middle of the night, and for a brief second, see a girl standing in my room, wearing a dirty white dress, soaked to the skin. Just, like, standing there. The image is etched into my mind. I remember my heart jumping, my eyes blink and she's gone. At the time, it really freaked me out, but in the morning, I write it off to a trick of the light, but the feeling I had when I saw her keeps me awake for a few nights. Fast forward a week, I'm storytelling at a party to a second year, in the UK. Second years move off campus and freshers move into the halls, who lived in the same block. He tells me a few people have had the same experience the year before. One saw her through their second story window, the others say she was just standing in the room. A month or so later, I hear a guy from another floor has described the same sighting. This time she is sitting on the end of his bed. TLDR. Drowned female fresher haunts university rooms. My younger brother has a tendency to talk in his sleep. And by talk I mean scream bloody murder. Since we shared a room when we were little kids, I actually got used to him doing this. Fast forward to our teenage years and we have our own rooms directly across from each other. One night, I'm trying to fall asleep when the light turns on in my brother's room, and he screams at the top of his lungs, "Mather," and there's a man in my room. Driven by a ridiculous surge of adrenaline, I bolt across the hallway towards his room with my pawnshop samurai sword, ready to conduct combat with whoever is in there. I charge into his room naked, wide-eyed, and shaking, and he is the only person in there. Sound a freaking sleep. The creepy thing, his bed was a good 12 feet from the light switch. I didn't sleep that night. Props to you for deciding in split second time you would handle things. Nice. So me and my then girlfriend had just initiated making out on her family living room couch. No one is home. It's mid-afternoon. Suddenly, and completely out of nowhere, a glass of water on the coffee table shatters. Maybe shatters isn't the best word. More like completely exploded for no reason. Obviously it scared the pee out of us. We found glass scattered several feet away from where it happened, but luckily none of it hit us. This glass of water had been room temperature and sitting there untouched for at least a half an hour. We stopped making out. TLDR. Dong blocking ghosts. More like her dad hiding in the closet with a BB gun. You know it's 3:37 AM now. There's a full moon and I don't know why am I doing this to myself, but my twin sister dreamed that my soon-to-be married cousin was going to die before her wedding. Car crash. She woke up sobbing and being a mess. Relax sis, it was just a dream, I said. Nothing is going to happen to Aid. She is going to be very happy soon. She fell asleep still sobbing. 2 weeks later my cousin died in a car crash. Here's another anecdote the I originally posted with an old username. The story itself is a few months old now, but I copied and pasted the text, so it is still written as if it just happened several days ago. My grandmother is in a nursing home after suffering a stroke a few months ago. Mentally, she is all there. However, her one side is partially paralyzed, and she is in rehab in the nursing home. She's been weakened by the relative lack of activity, though. On Sunday, as we were getting ready to go visit her first thing in the morning as we always do, we got a call from the family of her old best friend. The friend had moved to Florida about 10 years ago, and they had gradually lost touch save for a Christmas card every now and then. Well, the friend had just died very early that morning, and they were calling to inform us of her death. When we got to the nursing home we signed in and noticed we were the first visitors of the day. We went to my grandmother's room and said hi. We also have a little visitors book for people to sign in her room so we know who has visited her. Nobody had signed it since Saturday morning. As we walked into her room, she exclaimed, "Oh my, so many visitors this morning." We asked what she meant. She replied that she had gotten a visit from an old dear friend that morning. It was the friend from Florida who had just passed away. She had told my grandmother that she was going away for a while, not to worry, that she would be watching out for her, and that they would see each other again. My grandmother also remarked at how healthy she looked. I've never had chills run down my spine like that before. Later I asked if anyone had been to my grandmother's room that morning, and the staff said no. We asked if any phone calls had come through for her that morning, and they again said no. They also log phone calls for residents, and when they checked the logs there was nothing that they had forgotten. I also this morning called the family of the friend in Florida to offer my condolences and ask if they had called anyone else around here. I asked under the guise that I would help notify people around here so I didn't want to double call people. They said we were the only ones they had called from around here, and the only reason they called us is because they thought my grandmother still lived with us. They had no idea until I told them this morning that she is in a nursing home. I know it's in the realm of reality that she could have simply dreamed it, but the chances of her having a dream like that with that sort of message on the very morning that her friend died are so remote that it still gives me chills. TLDR. My grandmother's friend died, and about the time she died my grandmother saw a vision of her saying goodbye even though my grandmother had no idea her friend had passed. This doesn't seem scary to me as much as it seems sweet. She said goodbye to her old friend and made her feel better about dying. Didn't happen to me, but my grandfather died of a heart attack in the kitchen of his married, lifelong home. My grandmother sold the house a few years later to a young family whose parents lived right across the street. We have basically no contact with them except that one day the grandmother, across the street neighbor, came into her work to talk to her. She said that they think that my grandfather is haunting the home. My mother, not one to believe in this stuff, kind of just brushes it off. But the woman went on to talk about how the two daughters, 6, see an elderly man sitting in an armchair in the corner of the living room. He will also tell them things about my mom and her sisters that no one else could possibly know. She got pretty freaked out by this, told me, but refuses to tell my grandmother for fear that she'll feel like she abandoned him. Apparently the family is fine with it. The girls think he's nice and don't question anything. TLDR. My dead Irish grandfather is haunting my grandparents' old house and the new family is 100% cool with it. This happened about 16 years ago. I had been living away from home for about 3-4 years at that point and was living alone. In the middle of winter I had an extremely vivid dream. I was in the garage at my mother's house. The garage was nearly empty, which was unusual considering how much junk was normally in there. I was standing next to a large shelf unit that had a bunch of things on it, including some hefty power tools such as a circular saw. I heard music and suddenly I was 5 years old again, chasing after the ice cream man who just passed in front of the house. I heard a crash, turned around, and saw the shelf unit had collapsed and the circular saw had buried its blade in the concrete floor of the garage. I woke up, thought how weird, and went about my life. About 6 months later my mother asked me to help her paint the inside of her garage. I went to her house on Saturday morning and we emptied the garage into her backyard. I was moving the last of the larger heavier items as she was sweeping the floor. She bent over to use the dustpan to collect the debris. At the same time, I heard music coming from the approaching ice cream truck. The dream I had 6 months earlier flashed into my consciousness and, purely on instinct, I grabbed my mother and pulled her away just as the shelf unit she was standing next to collapsed. The circular saw fell exactly where her head would have been if I hadn't pulled her away. That episode is the main reason why I'm fairly certain there is more to human existence than what we can see around us. And the only reason why I don't fully call myself an atheist. A life was stolen from the Red God. A man needs a name. I work as a CNA at a nursing home. We have one resident that is really out of it and talks in his sleep really loud. I went to close his door so that the other residents could sleep, walking so softly that he couldn't hear me. He is almost all deaf. I closed the door, also very quietly. Given that this deaf man had no reason to hear me, he says to me as I'm closing his door, "Come here little girl. Come here girly. Come back here little girl." I was so scared I almost peed myself thinking I would die. The lights were out and there was no way he could see me or know that I was a girl. Still creeped out by him. About 15 years ago, my sister received a doll for Christmas that sang nursery rhymes. Unbeknownst to me, a few weeks later it had suffered some water damage and was malfunctioning. So it's 2 AM, and I'm getting up to take a pee. From a dark corner behind me, I hear the distorted and slightly demonic voice of a little girl. "Little lamb, little lamb." I used to work in an old pub. I was there completely by myself one afternoon. No boss, no staff, no customers. I was taking the opportunity to royally slack off when I heard footsteps slowly coming up the stairs from the cellar. I figured I must have been daydreaming and totally missed someone come in and go downstairs, so I grabbed a cloth and started to look busy polishing the ale pumps. I heard someone come up the stairs and walk behind me, brushing my shoulder. I turned round to talk to whoever it was, but there was nobody there. I remember was more annoyed than anything. I was always so proud of my skepticism and some stupid ghost came along and ruined it. Other stuff happened there too. The landlady lived above the pub and was redecorating. She had put brand new, unopened paint tins on the floor which were open up and spilled everywhere when she came back from a shopping trip. The pub is next to a railway line, and bodies of people that were killed on the tracks used to be brought there back in the old days. One of the old regulars remembers a railway worker bringing in a severed head to show off to his buddies. Crap people got up to before TVA. I am currently sitting alone in the old pub I work at and your story made me move to the chair furthest from the basement doors. Now I don't think I believe in ghosts, and I think this is creepy. but my father seems to think it's calming. My grandmother, dad's mother, died before I was born, so I had no idea what she looked like. I'd never seen pictures, and we weren't close to his father, so I'd never really asked about that side of the family. I was on my computer in my room kinda late one night when the lights went down. Power cuts are quite frequent in my area, so I thought nothing of it and went to get into bed. Just as I get into bed, there's this lady standing at the foot of it. Definitely wasn't asleep. Massive chills all over my body. She doesn't say anything and sort of just extends her hand, like open towards me, like she wants to give something to me. I freak the frick out. Standard. And the lights flicker on again and she's not there. Did not sleep that night. Anyway, a few weeks later I'm rummaging through the cupboards trying to find my birthday presents, and I find a box of old photos of my dad and whatnot. One of them is of my dad and the lady I'd seen a month or so before at the foot of my bed. Cue panic. I ask my dad and it turns out it's his mother in the photo. He believes she came and saw me. I don't particularly know what I believe. She needs your blood to be human again. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.